Fare for the Ferryman. In the heart of Manila, under the glow of jeepney lights and rain, one driver begins to notice the coins he collects are stamped with tomorrow's date. They say some fares are paid for rides the body never finishes. From Calico Tales Publishing, this is a Filipino horror story about fate, mercy, and the debts we pay to the dead. Exact fare only. Let's begin. The rain over Recto wasn't just water, it was a weight. It fell with a percussive hiss on the hot asphalt, pressing the day's diesel fumes down into a suffocating ground-level fog that carried the distant, brackish scent of the Pasig River. It wasn't a cleansing rain. It was a Manila rain, one that seemed to make everything dirtier, smearing the grime on the sidewalks and deepening the shadows in the alleys until they looked like wounds in the city's skin. It beaded on the jeepney's pitted chrome saints and streamers, each drop a tiny, distorted lens for the city's smudged sodium glow, turning the vibrant chaos into a melancholic, watery painting where all the colors bled together. Boye Alcover felt the dampness deep in his knuckles as he gripped the wheel, the familiar ache a rhythm synced to the shudder of the old engine. It was a partnership, this ache and this engine. They were the twin clocks by which he measured his life. 42 years had settled into his bones the same way this route had settled into the city's map, a line of ink, worn and permanent, Quiapo to Divisoria, Divisoria to Quiapo. It was the city's blood flowing through its hardened veins, and he was just one corpuscle, moving with the relentless, indifferent pulse. He knew every pothole, every faded advertisement, every corner where the ghosts of old accidents lingered, their memory a faint shimmer in the air on the hottest days. The jeepney itself was an extension of his body, its groans his own, its hunger for fuel a mirror of the hollowness in his own gut. He pulled to the curb, the brakes groaning a long metallic prayer. Passengers shuffled off into the downpour, a fleeting collection of anonymous lives leaving behind the ghost warmth of their bodies and the earthy scent of wet fabric. The last one, a woman with a laden bayong that smelled of ginger and green mangoes, paused, her face hidden by the ragged edge of a dripping umbrella. She pressed a coin into his palm, her fingers as cold and quick as a fish. "Salamat, Mama." The words were a common courtesy, but tonight they felt thin, lost in the sound of the rain on the metal roof. Boye nodded, his eyes already on the fare box. The day's haul was a meager constellation of silver and nickel, not enough to quiet the gnawing in his gut. He worked the gear shift, the metal hot and alive under his hand, and merged back into the slow-moving river of traffic. It was only later, during a lull near the Quiapo church, where the faithful and the faithless mingled in equal number, that he counted the fare. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the air was thick with the smell of sampaguita and candle wax from the vendor stalls that huddled against the ancient stone walls. He tipped the contents of the box onto the faded vinyl of the passenger seat beside him, the coins clinking like tiny dissonant bells in the sudden quiet. He sorted them by instinct, his calloused thumbs knowing the weight and feel of each denomination without needing to look. 10 peso, 5 peso, 1 peso. A lifetime of counting had made his hands a machine, an abacus of flesh and bone. Then he saw it. One coin felt different. It was a 5 peso piece, heavy and solid, but the light from a passing headlight caught it strangely, without a gleam. The metal had a tarnish that seemed less like age and more like a permanent shadow, an absence of light, as if it had absorbed the city's deepest glooms. He picked it up. The profile of Emilio Aguinaldo was sharp, the edges unnaturally crisp, but the date stamped beneath the hero's chin was wrong. It wasn't a year from the past, worn smooth by 1,000 transactions. It was tomorrow's. He squinted, holding it closer to the dim, flickering dashboard light. There it was, clear as a scar, the current month, the next day's date, the coming year. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced a line down his spine. It was impossible. A minting error, maybe, a clever fake from the counterfeiters in the underpass. He'd seen plenty of those, coins that felt too light, their edges poorly milled. But the weight of this one felt true. It settled in his palm with an authority that defied logic. It was just early. He slipped the coin into his shirt pocket, a secret weight against his heart. The rain let up, leaving the air tasting of ozone, metal, and wet earth. He finished his route under the watchful, unforgiving eyes of the Black Nazarene, the church a silent mountain of stone and accumulated faith. Before heading back to the garage, he parked near a row of stalls where the city's whispers were sold. Santo vendors hawked rosaries next to men selling charms braided from unfamiliar roots that promised luck in love or cards. The air was a thick soup of belief and desperation. He found the older woman he was looking for, Lola Sita, her face a road map of wrinkles, her eyes holding the patience of stone. She sat behind a low table, a deck of greasy tarot cards spread before her like a patient's splayed ribs. "A question for the road driver?" she asked, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. Boye hesitated, the sound of the city fading into a low hum. He felt foolish, like a boy chasing superstitions, but the coin's cold presence in his pocket urged him on. He placed it on her table. "Lola, ever seen anything like this?" She didn't touch it. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, seemed to look through the metal into the intention behind its making. She leaned forward, her nostrils flaring as if she could smell its wrongness. She lit a stick of cheap incense, the smoke coiling in the humid air, a fragile prayer against the city's grime. "Some fares," she murmured, her gaze distant, fixed on the chaotic flow of traffic beyond his shoulder, "are not for the ride that is ending. They are for the one that is about to begin." She looked at him then, her eyes sharp for a moment, pinning him with a startling clarity. "Be careful, Boye. The ferryman is always collecting, and he always demands exact change." The next morning, the coin was still in his pocket, a small cold fact in the humid Manila dawn. The date on it was now today's. Boye tried to forget it, to lose it in the familiar, grounding ritual of his work, the pre-dawn check of the engine's oil and water, the perfunctory wipe of the condensation from the rearview mirror, the first shouted "Divisoria, Divisoria" that tore through the quiet air. The city woke around him, a slow, groaning beast stretching its concrete limbs. The smells of frying garlic from a nearby silog stand and the sharp tang of exhaust fumes mingled, the scent of Manila itself. He was navigating the choked arteries of Recto Avenue, a place where progress and decay were locked in a permanent, grinding embrace, when the world stopped. Ahead of him, a six-wheeler truck, dangerously overloaded with steel rebar that bristled from its flatbed like metallic spines, blew a tire. The sound was a flat, brutal clap of thunder that echoed off the buildings. The truck swerved, a lumbering metal animal losing its footing. It clipped the side of another jeepney, a rival from a different line, peeling its colorful metal skin back like a sardine can. The crash was a symphony of screaming brakes, the tortured shriek of metal on metal, and the percussive shattering of glass. Boyette's own jeepney shuddered as he slammed on the brakes, stopping just meters from the wreckage. Traffic instantly clotted. People spilled into the street, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity, phones already raised to capture the tragedy. From his elevated driver's seat, Boye had a clear, terrible view. He saw the paramedics arrive, their movements urgent and precise amidst the chaos. He saw them pull a woman from the twisted metal of the other jeep. He recognized the faded floral print of her duster, the same one he had seen under the umbrella last night, the woman with the bayong, the one who had given him the coin. His blood ran cold. He watched, frozen, as they laid a white sheet over her, a final, quiet act of surrender that felt obscene in the noisy, bustling street. The world came back into focus with a sickening lurch. He could hear the sirens now, the frantic shouting, the distant tinny music from a street vendor's radio playing a cheerful pop song. He looked away, his gaze falling to his own fare box, a reflexive habit. Another coin lay on top of the growing pile, separate from the rest as if placed there by an unseen, deliberate hand. It gleamed with the same shadowed tarnish. He picked it up with trembling fingers, the metal strangely cold to the touch. A 10-peso piece this time, stamped with tomorrow's date. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a rule, a receipt for a ride not yet taken, a transaction logged before it was made. He scanned the faces of the passengers in his jeepney, their expressions now merely impatient, annoyed by the delay. Which one of them had paid it? He couldn't know. The fares were dropped in anonymous transactions of trust and metal. Later that afternoon, the traffic was moving again, the wreckage cleared, the only evidence of the morning's tragedy, a faint, rainbow shimmer of oil on the asphalt. A young woman boarded, her hair in a neat bun, a nurse's uniform crisp and white under a thin jacket. She dropped her fare into the box. He heard the distinct clink of a single heavy coin landing on the lighter ones. Boyer's eyes darted to the fare box. There, sitting atop the others, was the 10-peso piece. He knew, with a certainty that terrified him down to his soul, that it was her. He had to do something. He couldn't just watch it happen again. He couldn't be a spectator to another death foretold. "Miss," he called out, his voice hoarse, cracking on the word. She was settling into a seat near the back, pulling a textbook from her bag. "Miss, that coin. Your fare." She looked up, her expression tired but wary. The default mask of a woman used to being hassled in public. "What about it?" It's no good." The lie was clumsy, heavy on his tongue. "It's a fake. A slug." Her brow furrowed. "It's 10 pesos. I just got it from the money changer at the hospital." She saw the look on his face, the desperate, wild intensity, and her suspicion hardened into annoyance. "Look, I paid. Just drive. I have to get home." He wanted to scream at her, to grab her by the shoulders and tell her about the woman in the duster, about the impossible date on the coin. But how could he? He would sound like a madman, a hustler trying to scare a few extra pesos from a tired nurse. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The other passengers were watching now, their murmurs a low hum of judgment. He had a choice, a terrible, stark choice. Let her go. Let fate, or whatever this was, run its course, and live with the silence. Or he could intervene. He could break the route. He could try to outrun the ledger. He made the decision in a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. He ignored the shouts of the other passengers demanding their stops. He wrenched the wheel, turning the jeepney sharply at the next corner, a jarring, unsignaled move that earned a chorus of angry horns. He was off his designated route, a violation that could cost him his license, his livelihood. The nurse, the woman with the coin, yelled from the back, her voice sharp with alarm. "Hey, where are you going? This isn't the way. Let me off." "Shortcut," he lied, his voice tight, strangled. He watched her in the rearview mirror, her face a mask of anger and escalating fear. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he had to keep her away from whatever lay in wait for her on the proper path. He kept the 10-peso coin on the dashboard, a cold metal omen guiding his panicked flight. He tailed her when she finally got off, practically jumping from the moving jeepney, screaming threats at him. He followed her on foot from a distance, a frantic, clumsy shadow, his heart pounding with the terror of his own audacity. He watched her walk toward a busy intersection, the one he had deliberately, instinctively avoided. He saw the pedestrian light flash green. He saw the city bus, its brakes failing with a high-pitched metallic scream hurtling through the red light. But she wasn't in its path. He had pulled her off course. For a dizzying, breathless moment, he felt a surge of godlike triumph. He had done it. He had cheated the ferryman. The bus crashed into a lamppost 2 blocks from where she would have been crossing, a sickening mess of screeching metal and panicked shouts. The woman was safe. She stood on the sidewalk, oblivious to the death she had just sidestepped, annoyed at the new delay. She never knew. Boyer retreated, his heart pounding with a strange, volatile mix of relief and terror. He had changed things. He had bent the line. But as he walked back to his jeepney, the air grew cold, the victory already feeling hollow, temporary. When he climbed back into the driver's seat, the familiar vinyl cool against his sweat-soaked shirt, he was no longer alone. A figure sat in the front passenger seat, where the vinyl was worn smooth from countless passengers. It was just a shape, a silhouette against the fading light, a patch of air that was somehow darker than the shadows around it. It had no distinct features, no face, no form. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. It fogged no glass. It was just there. A silent witness, a passenger who had paid no fare but was owed the entire ride. Boye stared, his breath catching in his throat, a cold stone of fear lodging in his chest. He wasn't a driver anymore. He was something else. He was involved. The ferryman now knew his name. He understood then, with a clarity that was more terrifying than any confusion. This wasn't a game he could win. It was a ledger, and by tearing out a page, he had written his own name in the margins. The shadow didn't speak, but its presence was a clear, unambiguous message. The debt would still be collected. The route had been rerouted, but the destination remained the same. The city at night was a different animal. The oppressive heat of the day bled out of the concrete, replaced by a calm, watchful silence broken only by the hum of the jeepney's engine and the distant wail of a siren. The shadow in the passenger seat remained, a constant, unnerving presence. Strangely, it didn't frighten him anymore. Its profound stillness was a kind of anchor, a chilling reminder of the new reality he inhabited. He drove, and the city flowed past his windows, a blur of gaudy neon, deep shadows, and fleeting lives. The next day he took the coins, the first one now dated 2 days past, and the second dated yesterday, to the only person he knew who might understand things that didn't make sense, even if only to disprove them. His cousin Carlo was a traffic enforcer. He was a man who believed in rules, in the clear, unambiguous lines of the law and the physics of the road. He dealt in facts, not omens. They met at a small carinderia, the air thick with the comforting smell of beef broth and steamed rice. Boye laid the coins on the sticky plastic of the table between them. "Look at these," he said, his voice low, conspiratorial. Carlo picked one up, turning it over in his practical, steady hands. He rubbed the dirt from the date with his thumb. "What about it?" "It's just coins." "The date, Carlo. When I got it, the date was for the next day, both of them." Carlo squinted at it, then at Boye, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "So, it's a coin. What's the big deal? Probably a mistake from the mint. They screw up all the time." He weighed it in his palm. "Feels right, not a slug." "One person is dead, Carlo," Boyet insisted, leaning forward, his voice cracking. "The 2 people who gave me these coins. One died on the day stamped on the metal. The other got lucky. I saw it happen." His cousin sighed, the weary sigh of a man who spent his days dealing with the city's chaos and had no patience for more of it off the clock. "Boye, you're tired. You're working too hard. You're seeing things that aren't there. It's a coincidence. A tragic, horrible coincidence. This city is full of them." He pushed the coins back across the table. "Go home. Get some sleep. Don't go looking for ghosts in San. You might find them." Boyet knew it was useless. How could he explain the shadow in his jeepney, the cold certainty that settled in his gut like undigested stone? He left Carlo, the coins feeling like accusations in his pocket. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone in this. That night, another passenger boarded who drew his attention. A man in a black hooded jacket, the kind that was too heavy for Manila's sweltering heat. He always took the seat directly behind Boye, a space most passengers avoided. And he never paid. He never had to. Whenever the hooded man rode, the fare box would balance perfectly at the end of the night, an exact count down to the last centavo. Tonight, the man's presence felt different. It felt connected to the shadow in the front seat, 2 parts of the same unnerving, silent equation. Boye drove, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the man's face beneath the deep hood. But it was always lost in shadow. He felt a strange sense of familiarity, a resonance he couldn't place, like a half-remembered dream. His route took him past Quiapo Church again. On an impulse, he pulled over, needing an answer. Any answer. He sought out Lola Sita. He found her in the same spot, the smoke from her incense a thin gray prayer in the surrounding darkness. He didn't show her a coin this time. He just asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Lola, the ferryman you spoke of. Who is he?" She shuffled her cards, her ancient hands moving with a slow, deliberate grace. "The city is a river," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the cards. "It has currents, and it has debts. Some souls get lost in the crossing. But there is another river, driver, a current that runs beneath us all, connecting the debts of one soul to the payments of another. The ferryman. He isn't a man. He is a duty, a route that must be finished. He rides the lines, collecting the fares for the final stop. She paused, her head cocked as if listening to a voice only she could hear. He doesn't choose. He only collects what is owed. The ledger is old, driver. Older than the streets you drive on. She refused to say more. A new kind of fear, colder and sharper, took root in Boye. This wasn't about a single entity he could fight or evade. It was a mechanism, a system, as impersonal as the traffic lights, as relentless as the tides. And his jeepney had become one of its gears. From that day on, he started a ledger of his own. He kept a small, cheap notebook on his dashboard. When a future-dated coin appeared, he would try to see who dropped it. He'd jot down a description. Old man with a cane, student with a blue backpack, woman in a red dress. He would note the date on the coin, the denomination. And then he would listen. He'd tune his small radio to the news, listening for the police chatter, the reports of accidents, of crimes, of sudden, senseless deaths that were the city's daily bread. Old man with a cane, a massive heart attack while crossing the street, student with a blue backpack, a victim of a robbery gone wrong on a footbridge, woman in a red dress, slipped and fell from a wet, crumbling pedestrian overpass. The deaths always lined up. His notebook became a litany of ghosts, a chronicle of his own helplessness. He tried to intervene again, subtly at first. He'd offer a free ride to someone he suspected, hoping that if no fare were paid, the transaction would be void. But another coin would simply appear later, dropped by another hand, and the ledger would be balanced. He tried taking detours, but fate, it seemed, was more creative than he was. An accident would happen on the new route. A stray bullet from a police shootout would find its mark. He even tried locking his doors once, refusing to pick up any more passengers after a coin appeared. He just drove the jeepney empty, except for him and the silent shadow. But the person died anyway, hit by a taxi just as they were trying to hail his locked jeep. He wasn't preventing anything. He was just a witness, a chronicler of last rides. The coins kept appearing, each one a small, cold promise of a death to come. The next morning, Boye drove his route under a weak sun that looked more like exhaustion than light. Manila steamed in its own breath. The puddles along Recto were opaque, reflecting nothing, and the smell of hot rubber mixed with fried garlic from the breakfast stalls. He told himself he would drive normally today. No omens, no ledgers, just a man doing his job. But the notebook on his dashboard glared at him like a wound. By the following week, the notebook was half full. Every page bore a new name, a new timestamp, a new small defeat. He no longer tried to intervene. He simply recorded, as if obedience might earn him mercy. Between fares, he started hearing things. The faint clink of unseen coins when the jeep was empty. Whispers like receipts being tallied. Sometimes the engine's idle matched the cadence of human breathing. One afternoon, as he waited at a stoplight near Lawton, he noticed something in the puddle beside the wheel. His reflection was distorted, yes, but behind him, in the ripple, stood the hooded man. The figure's outline wavered with the water's tremble, but the posture was unmistakable. The exact weight, the same slump of the shoulders. And when Boye blinked, the image didn't vanish. It watched back. He drove through the red light, horns blared, but he didn't care. The city had started keeping its own books, and his name was on every page. The rain had returned, a steady whispering curtain that washed the city in shades of gray, making the world seem older, sadder. Boye was driving his usual route, the rhythm of the road a bleak comfort. The notebook on his dashboard was filled with names and descriptions, a graveyard of failed interventions. The shadow in the passenger seat felt heavier tonight, its presence more absolute, as if it were drawing substance from his despair. The man in the black hood was in his usual spot, a silent sentinel behind him. Boye glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a second, the angle of the light, The reflection on the wet glass did something strange. The hood had slipped back slightly, and the face beneath it was illuminated for a fleeting moment by a passing streetlight. Boye's heart seized in his chest, a painful, violent clench. The face was older, etched with lines of a weariness so profound it seemed carved into the bone. There was a scar that cut through one eyebrow, pale and silver against the weathered skin. It was a face he knew better than his own. It was his. The air in the cab went thin, altitude-sick, like he'd climbed some invisible mountain without moving at all. The city outside kept flowing, headlights, rain, wet faces, but everything sounded far away, as if he were hearing Manila through a seashell. His tongue tasted like a battery. The steering wheel was slick under his palms, not with rain, but with something colder, as if a coin had melted and smeared its metal across his skin. "Hindi puede," he whispered. Not a denial, more like a prayer that had lost its ending. At the next stoplight, a bus shelter loomed to his right, its plexiglass panels fogged with the breath of waiting commuters. In the shelter's fogged pane, he caught a double reflection: the profile of the hooded man just behind his seat, and layered over it, his own face in the driver's window. The two images overlapped, palimpsest and shadow, his mouth fitting the other mouth, his brow fitting the other scar, like Manila's old roads traced beneath the new concrete. He lifted his hand an inch from the wheel. The man in the hood did the same in the glass. From behind his shoulder came the driest thread of voice: "Hindi mo malalampasan ang sarili mo. You can't outrun yourself." The words arrived in his ear like already remembered advice, like a rule the road had always kept. Boyet swallowed, throat tight. The light turned green. He eased forward, and the bus shelter slid past, taking the double image with it. He tried to focus on anything ordinary. Under the roof's rhythmic drumming, he heard another sound now, a persistent, thin ringing, the exact timbre of a coin spun on a tabletop just before it settles. It came and went with each breath. He tightened his grip until the tendons in his forearms stung. "If you're me," he said, speaking to the hooded figure without turning, "tell me the way around. Tell me the shortcut." A long breath, rusty as an old hinge. "Walang shortcut. There isn't one." Another breath. "May bayad. There's a price." He almost laughed. Of course there was a price. The city never handed change without making you count it twice. In the small rectangular mirror above the fare box, he finally forced himself to look straight at the man. The hood lifted a fraction, not enough to show the entire face, just the edge of something he recognized too well, a scar through the eyebrow, a pale seam he himself did not yet wear, the future tucked into flesh like a receipt into a pocket. "Bakit ka bumabalik? Why do you keep coming back?" His own voice sounded younger than he felt. "To keep the driver on the line," the figure said. The line, not the road. A difference of only one word, but it opened a trapdoor in Boyer's chest. The line was an idea. The line ran through time as easily as through districts. The line connected debts like neighborhoods. The ringing in his ear rose, peaked, and then flattened into a plateau of silence. He noticed, with a strange, deliberate calm, that the long tear in the vinyl passenger seat had split a bit farther. Another memory coughed up. The night of the storm, the boy under the wheel, the way the city fell quiet in the exact second after the world breaks and before anyone screams. He had backed away then. He had backed away and let other men pick up what he should have carried. The ledger hadn't forgotten. "Sabihin mo na," he said, heat behind his eyes. "Just say it. Tell me what's due." But the hooded man said nothing more. Boyer's heart settled into a complex, skillful rhythm. "You pick up the weight. You carry it," he signaled, cut across a gap in traffic that did not quite exist, and slid under the overpass's concrete jaw. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands locked on the wheel to keep them from shaking. The few remaining passengers grumbled, but he ignored them. He turned in his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he already knew the answer. The hooded figure leaned forward. His voice, when it came, was a dry rustle, the sound of leaves skittering across pavement. I'm the one who keeps the route. I'm the one who makes sure the driver is always here. For what? To watch people die? Boye's voice was raw, with a week's worth of grief and anger. No, the older man rasped. To make sure you are in the right place at the right time. To save the one that matters. His eyes, Boye's own eyes, but clouded with a sorrow he couldn't yet comprehend, held his gaze. The ledger has to be balanced, most of the time, but one entry can be erased, at a great cost. I'm here to make sure you're ready to pay it. He offered no more explanation. Shaken, Boyet pulled back into traffic, his mind reeling. He wasn't just a witness. He was a tool being sharpened for a single purpose. He was a man being driven toward a single critical moment by himself, and he had no idea what it was. The revelation that he was haunting his own jeepney didn't stop the coins. If anything, the mechanism felt more relentless. The police had started to notice him. Twice in 1 week he had been at the scene of a fatal accident. To them, it wasn't fate, it was a pattern. One detective brought him in for questioning. "You seem to have a lot of bad luck, Mr. Alcova," the detective said. "Or maybe you're just a connoisseur of tragedy." Boye sat under the bare, buzzing bulb of the interrogation room. He had no answers that they would believe. "I'm a jeepney driver. I see what happens on the street. That's all." They let him go due to a lack of evidence, but he was now under their watch. The precinct reeked of old coffee and damp paper. The detective with the sweat-stained collar came back with 2 paper cups. He studied Boyet's license. "You used to run the old Quiapo Divisoria line, even before they changed the loading bay rules," the detective said. 20 years back. "I still run it." The man nodded. "My mother worked a stall by Ongpin. I was a kid who always fell asleep in the back of your jeep. You used to keep a small fan pointed at the last bench to cope with the afternoon heat. You remember that?" Boye's mouth opened, then closed. He did. He didn't remember the kid, but he remembered the idea of him. "I remember the fan," Boye said. The detective finally sat. "I'm not your enemy, Alcova. But the ledger of coincidence is getting hard to balance." "Ledger," Boyet repeated. The word came out like a cough. The detective sipped his coffee. "This city keeps books. When I was small, my mother would say the streets remember the feet that walk them. 'Huwag kang masyadong mag-ingay, anak,' she'd tell me. 'Don't make too much noise. The street hears.'" He shrugged. "Off the record, is there something I should know? A pattern?" Boyet stared at his hands. "Wala," he said. "Nothing." Then, because the word was a kind of cruelty to himself, he added, "Kung meron man, hindi ko pa alam kung paano sabihin." "If there is, I don't know how to say it." The detective took that in without blinking. "Okay, then at least listen. If your route consistently puts you in the worst minutes of the day, consider changing it. Walang bayani dito. No heroes here." "Wala ring kapalit," Boyet said. "There's no replacement." They let him go. Back in the cab, he tuned the radio to a talk station. The announcer read headlines: a hit and run, a fire, a ferry that would not cross. Between those notes, the station ran a segment for death notices. Names drifted by like leaves in a gutter. He killed the radio. The cab fell into the intimate quiet of machine sounds. Fan belt whisper, relay click, frame creak, and beneath those, the soft inner tinnitus again, a coin spun on a table just under hearing, refusing to fall. He made a small promise then, out loud, to air and vinyl. "Hindi na ako aatras. I won't step back again." The promise didn't feel brave. It felt like paying a fine he should have paid years ago. Night took the edges off everything, and then, because the city is a comedian who loves timing, a whistle cut through the night. Routine checkpoint. He pulled over. His cousin's silhouette stepped into his headlights. Relief, sudden and foolish, washed through him so quickly he mistook it for safety. "Everything all right, Insan?" Carlo said, leaning in. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I'm fine," Boye lied. As they spoke, Carlo reached for a cigarette. Something slipped from his pocket, rolled on the ribbed floor mat, and kissed Boye's shoe. A coin. Boye picked it up. The tarnish looked like a bruise beneath the metal skin. The date was today. Beside it, improbably neat as a clerk's note, a timestamp, 2:13. The coin in his hand was a prophecy with a deadline. He stared at it, his blood turning to ice. He looked up at Carlo, who was laughing at some joke, his face so complete of life, so oblivious. Not him. "What is it?" Carlo asked, noticing his sudden, stark silence. Boyer just held out the coin on his trembling palm. Carlo took it, squinting. "A timestamp? That's weird. Must be one of those commemorative things." He shrugged, pocketing the coin. "Anyway, stay safe out here, Boyer." He slapped the side of the jeepney and walked away. Boyer sat there, paralyzed. 2:13. His cousin. The mechanism wasn't just claiming strangers anymore. It was coming for his family. He looked at the seat behind him. The hooded figure of his future self was there, though it was broad daylight. He was watching, his presence a heavy, silent judgment. For the rest of the day, Boyer was a ghost. He drove his route on autopilot, his mind a frantic, screaming storm. Only Carlo mattered. Late that night, a coin for a different passenger appeared. A young girl with a bright red ribbon in her hair. She was coughing, a dry, rattling sound. The coin predicted her death in the next hour. Boyer looked at the coin, then at the girl. He could try to save her, but his mind was a single screaming siren. 2:13. Carlo. He fixated on the bigger prize. He couldn't afford another detour. He let the girl get off at a stop. He watched her disappear down a dark alleyway. And he did nothing. He chose. As he drove away, he heard the clink of coins from the fare box. It sounded different, louder, heavier. The cost of his choice was already being tallied on the ferryman's ledger. The city was drowning. A late-season typhoon had descended on Manila, turning the streets into murky, churning canals. It began with the sound of a city counting itself. Every roof, gutter, and signpost drummed the same rhythm, coins on tin, fate striking the balance sheet of the streets. Boyer drove through knee-deep water that turned intersections into mirrors. The dashboard clock blinked 1:02 a.m. He reached the underpass at last. The water there was darker, slower, more deliberate. Each swirl and eddy felt sentient. The city's water was awake. It had been waiting for him. He flicked on his high beams. The reflection that met him wasn't road or water. It was a mirror. For a moment, he saw another jeepney submerged beneath his, perfectly aligned, its driver identical but older, motionless, eyes closed. The lights flickered and went out. Darkness slammed shut like a ledger closing. The engine died. He heard the soft chime of a coin falling, clear, deliberate, inside the sealed cab. He turned his head. The fare box was half submerged. One coin rose to the surface, glinting even in the darkness, stamped across it. 2:13. The rain came down in solid, blinding sheets, drumming a frantic, deafening rhythm on the jeepney's metal roof. It was 1:45 a.m. He was hunting for his cousin. He'd found him directing traffic near the flood-prone underpass. Carlo, soaked to the bone, was waving cars through the rising water. Boyer parked the jeepney at the edge of the flood. The timestamp on the coin burned in his mind. 2:13. He watched the clock on his dashboard tick over. 02:10. A car stalled. Carlo waded in deeper, the water now up to his waist, pushing against the car's fender to move it. Boyer's jeepney chose that moment to die. The engine sputtered and went silent. The lights flickered and died. He was trapped. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw a power line sag from a nearby pole. It was spitting vicious blue sparks as it touched the surface of the floodwater. The current was live. Carlo, pushing the stalled car, was moving directly toward it. Boyer screamed his name, but the roar of the storm swallowed the sound. He fumbled with the door handle, but it was jammed. He was a prisoner. He looked at the passenger seat. The shadow was gone. He looked in the rearview mirror. The hooded figure of his future self sat in his usual spot, perfectly, horribly still. He wasn't moving. This was the moment. And Boyer was failing. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He was going to watch his cousin die. All was lost. The ferryman had won. In the heart of that failure, something broke inside Boyer. It was rage. a raw, defiant fury against the mechanism, against the ledger, against the silent, watching version of himself who had already accepted this loss. Number, not Carlo, not like this. His eyes darted around the dark cab, searching for a different answer. The live wire, the electricity, he had to break the connection. With a primal roar, he threw himself against the engine housing. He ripped at the hot metal cover with his bare hands, tearing his fingers on the sharp, rusted edges. He exposed the battery. He grabbed the positive cable, ignoring the searing jolt of electricity that shot up his arm, and yanked. The cable ripped free with a shower of sparks. Outside, the deadly blue arc on the water's surface vanished, but Carlo was still in the underpass. The road was a death trap. Boyer's mind saw the only other way. The road was closed, so he would take the water. He scrambled out the passenger side door and slogged through the flood to his cousin. "Carlo, we're leaving now." "Are you crazy? The Jeep is dead." "Not the Jeep." Boyer grabbed his arm. "The other way." He dragged his bewildered cousin away from the underpass toward the riverbank. The Pasig River, swollen and angry, churned beside them. A few hundred meters away was a small, all-night ferry crossing. It rarely ran in a storm this bad, but Boyer prayed. The ferryman, a wiry older man with a face like driftwood, took one look at them. "You're insane, wanting to cross in this." Boyer shoved a wad of wet bills into his hand. "Please, it's life or death." Something in Boyer's eyes must have convinced him. They climbed aboard. The small boat pitched violently in the black, churning water. He had cheated the road. He had taken a path the ledger hadn't accounted for. As they reached the middle of the river, a strange coldness filled the air. Boyer felt it in his pocket. He pulled out Carlo's coin. It was frosting over, a delicate, impossible tracery of ice forming on the metal. The ferryman, the mechanism of the city, hated the water. The river had its own rules, its own currents, its own ancient debts. He watched as the coin in his palm dissolved, melting away into nothingness, the last few grains of metallic dust swept away by the wind. The timestamp, 2:13, had passed while they were on the water. The appointment had been missed. The debt was erased. Carlo was safe. He had lived. Boyer stood on the heaving deck of the ferry, the rain washing the blood from his raw hands, and breathed for the first time all night. He had cheated the ferryman. The storm passed with the dawn, leaving behind a city washed clean. Boyer returned to his jeepney. The engine miraculously turned over on the first try with a familiar, comforting rumble. He drove back to his route. The passenger seat was empty. The shadow was gone. He drove the whole day. No future-dated coins appeared. The fare box filled with standard mundane currency. The relentless ticking of the ledger had fallen silent. That night, for the first time in weeks, the man in the black hood did not board. Boyer drove his route, and the seat behind him remained empty. He was alone. The loop was broken. At the end of his last run, he found it. One last coin at the bottom of the fare box. It had the familiar shadowed tarnish. He picked it up. On it was stamped his own name, Boyer Alcover. There was no date, no timestamp, just his name, a final open-ended entry in the ledger. This was his payment, his new role. He was the one who drove the route, the one who watched, the one who might, on a rainy night, choose to intervene. He was the ferryman who cheated fate by inches. He finally understood. The city had always kept its own books. He was no longer just another entry on its pages. He was the hand that turned them, the one who tallied the final, quiet sums. He took a small piece of tape and fixed the coin to his dashboard, just above the steering wheel, where he could always see it. He looked at his own tired face reflected in the dark windshield. The coin a dull gleam below. Maybe all debts end in reflection, he thought. A small, round reminder of the balance. He sat there for a long time without starting the engine. The city was breathing again. Dawn had come quietly, painting every puddle the same bruised gold. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel. The metal was cool. He realized that the silence filling the jeepney wasn't empty. It was exact. Somewhere inside that hush, he thought he could hear faint counting. Not the clink of coins, but something softer. Heartbeats, footsteps, whispered Salamat po from 1,000 small kindnesses that had survived the storm. He lifted his head. The windshield had fogged over with his breath. With one finger, he drew a small circle in the condensation. The mark vanished almost immediately. For the first time in days, he didn't feel watched. The hooded man was gone. Boyay turned the key. The engine rumbled awake, quiet but steady. The coin on the dashboard caught a shard of sunlight and flickered once, briefly, like an eyelid opening. Then it stilled. A calico cat, its fur a patchwork of orange, black and white, watched him from the shadows of a nearby alley, its yellow eyes seeming to understand. It gave a slow blink, a silent witness to the closing of the books, then turned and disappeared. Boyay started the engine. He pulled out into the Manila night, the coin with his name gleaming in the dim light. Above the fare box, his old, hand-painted sign was still there, a statement of fact that had become a statement of purpose. Exact fare only. 2 weeks after the storm, the city smelled of rust and wet cardboard. Carlo still took the same route to work, muscle memory steering him through recto long before thought could intervene. The sun was barely up. He slowed as he reached the intersection where Boyay used to idle. Then he saw it. Boyay's jeepney sat at the curb, empty, engine idling in a low, patient hum. Carlo braked. He stepped out of his motorcycle and approached. The jeepney was precisely as he remembered it. The radio inside hissed softly with static. A voice flickered through, half-formed. Then the static bent itself into something almost like a whisper. Exact fare only. Carlo froze. He climbed the jeep's steps. The seat was dry. The key was in the ignition. The air smelled faintly of metal and candle smoke. "Boyet," he whispered, "kung naririnig mo ako, if you can hear me." The static stuttered, 3 sharp bursts, and stopped. The engine died in the same breath. Silence filled the jeep. Carlo sat there a long time, listening to the absence. When he finally climbed down, he turned once more before leaving. Something on the dashboard caught the light, a small circle of dull metal taped above the steering wheel. A coin, tarnished nearly black. He couldn't see the inscription, but he knew what it meant. He walked back to his motorbike. When he reached into his pocket for his keys, his fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. A coin. Cold. Heavy. He pulled it out. The tarnish was the same shadowed hue. The date stamped beneath Jose Rizal's profile made his heart skip once, hard enough to hurt. It was dated far ahead. He stared at it before closing his hand around it. The metal was already warming to his skin, the way living things do when they decide to stay. Behind him, the jeepney's engine coughed to life for a single beat, then went still. The sound was almost gentle, like the city drawing a final line. The city keeps its traffic. The rain still falls. But somewhere, a jeep still waits for its last passenger. This was Fare for the Ferryman from Calico Tales Publishing LLC. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. For more stories like this, visit calicotales.publishing.com.